The ability to get started on a task right away, even when you don't feel like doing it. That's an important executive functioning skill for students and adults. And it's not just an academic skill, it's a life skill. And that's why we're talking about it here on the podcast today. And joining me today are my guests and Child Nexus members, Jenny Drennan and Hannah Ross. They are both educational therapists. Jenny is founder of We Thrive Learning, and Hannah is founder of Summit Learning. They both specialize in supporting students with ADHD, dyslexia, and math and writing challenges. And they're here to talk about task initiation, why it's hard, and strategies for success.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Jenny Drennan and Hannah Ross, welcome back.
Thank you. So good to be here.
Thank you, Karen. It's really nice.
Yeah, I think you've both been on the podcast before, right?
Yes.
Now we get to come together. So even better.
I know. This is so much fun. And I believe that you both have presented together before too.
We meet a lot. I don't think we've actually presented together, but we are starting to a lot more. Yeah, she's kind of my work wife.
Yeah, we realize it's really fun to have, as you know from doing the podcast, it's so nice to have another person to bounce ideas off of. And I feel like it just really, really improves thinking and planning. So we're really enjoying working together in this way.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted you both here, because you both have such great contributions to this field and understanding of our neurodiverse students and the challenges they face and how to support them in doing the things that they want to do. So thank you again for being here and for coming back.
Thanks for having us. We're excited to talk about this.
No, so there are a number of executive functions. We've talked about executive functioning on the podcast. But the one that we're going to talk about today is really misunderstood. It's often associated with laziness and a lack of motivation. And, we're talking today about task initiation. And this is the one where parents will say, you haven't even started your homework yet. You have, or you have your test tomorrow. You haven't even started studying. And I just think it's so important to just understand conceptually what is task initiation, and then we can go from there. So I don't know who wants to go with talking about what do we mean by task initiation?
So task initiation is, we like to think of it as the ability to get started on a task, even if you don't really feel like doing it. So it's doing it when you've planned to do it. And what we see kids really struggle with is that internal dialogue, sort of like their own self-talk that helps them walk through how to get started on something, how to do something from start to finish, and how it's going to feel once it's done. Right? So it's almost like, how do they move from point A to point B? And that dialogue that we have organically, naturally, they don't have yet.
And when you talk about that dialogue, are you talking about like the self-talk? Like, hey, this is what I'm going to do first, then I'm going to do this.
Yeah, definitely. That internal dialogue of like what steps need to happen and how they can motivate themselves to do a task. I just read a really great metaphor for task initiation the other day of like imagining like a big ball on top of a hill, and task initiation is like the energy needed to get that ball rolling. And then once it's rolling, it picks up momentum and keeps going and you're happy. But getting that ball rolling is the task initiation part that's really challenging for a lot of people and a lot of our learners.
Yeah, I really love that example because then I can also visualize it, right? It's just like just getting started. If you can start it, then the ball will keep rolling, right? The momentum will keep going. But it's that getting started is the part that kids struggle with. And what does that look like in real life, whether that's academically or at home?
Okay, so we can give a couple of examples of maybe what it looks like for us and as well as students and maybe what teachers see in the classroom. So at school, it could look like, an instruction is given and the student's just sitting there, right? We want to really make a distinction too that a task initiation is kind of, could be confused. It is an executive function skill, but it could also be confused with motivation, right? And also could be confused with buy-in, right? So those are three different, very different things. But for the purposes of the podcast here, we'll talk about just getting started on something. At home, it could look like beginning your chores when you're supposed to, or taking a shower, right? Once you're supposed to. For adults, it could look like putting the holiday decorations away when you've planned on it, or folding your laundry, right? And so you're putting things off that you don't necessarily want to begin to do. And I think a big part of that is that when we think of the task itself, it could be a feeling that we're trying to avoid, right? So something about that is not causing us or helping us to kind of build that momentum that Hannah was talking about with the rolling of the ball.
Yeah, and I will note that for a lot of parents that we talk to, I think struggles with task initiation can be really triggering. It feels really frustrating oftentimes for parents to see their child just like sitting in front of the laptop, not opening it up or starting homework. Or like the parent knows the child has a big test to study for, but the student is playing video games, they're waiting, they're putting it off. And for parents, parents often are like, just get it done. Like, get this done so we can enjoy the rest of the day. It appears that the student is being lazy. They might be unmotivated to complete the task. But in fact, that's really what the struggle with task initiation is. And so we do find for a lot of homes, it's kind of a point of contention for families where parents just really want their child to initiate the task and get it done. And I even think about, like, even within spouses, I think a lot of times we might want our spouse to, I just want you to hang up that picture frame. And then they don't initiate the task and we're triggered and frustrated. So I do think it's funny to think about how task initiation can kind of bring some conflict up, and why I think it's important to better understand and to discuss.
Yeah. And I think that really speaks to also the idea of procrastination. It just looks like, hey, you still haven't done that thing that you said you were going to get done. And how it shows up not just in the classroom, but at home. Because even if sometimes the student will even have the computer open or have the worksheet in front of them, and parents will say, I'm looking, and they're looking at the worksheet. They've got the pencil on the table or the laptop is open, and I'm looking, and they're not even getting started. And sometimes that's with dinner. I've had parents say, the dinner's plates in front of my child. We're all starting, and the fork is right there, maybe even in his hand, but he has not started. The food's getting cold. And it's like just that. And it can feel like it's deliberate, but it's not. I think that's a really important piece, that it's not like I'm deliberately not starting because I want to annoy you. Right.
So, yes. And I think that's the thought parents have. And when we really get curious as to what truly is coming in the way of that, it helps us be able to collaborate with the child to then be able to come up with a solution or a different way of doing it that they are much more likely to initiate, right? So we'll talk more about that later, but I think we'll come back to those. I think those two are great examples.
Right. And I love that you talked about the fact that this is not laziness. It's not a lack of motivation. There are actually some real common causes of struggles in this area. Could you talk about those?
So there are some common causes of struggles with task initiation. I think it's important to note that we all struggle with task initiation at some point. We all have those tasks that are really hard for us to get started. So it just, to some extent, the struggle is human nature, and it's normal. But there are some things that can make the struggle with task initiation harder and more challenging for a child. And one of those big things is having a learning difference, such as ADHD or diagnosed challenges with executive function or whatnot. So students who have, for example, students who have ADHD, there's going to be a couple factors that are going to make task initiation even harder for them. And part of that is because they might have had past struggles with some of the tasks they need to complete. Maybe they've really had a hard time completing an essay in the past. So having to sit down and do one now is really bringing up those bad memories of the past. They feel like it's hard. They feel like they can't do it. So there's kind of that cycle of struggle there. In addition, students with ADHD might struggle with working memory. So not only is it hard to start the task, it's hard to remember that they even have this task to start or what the steps might be. And in addition, students with ADHD are also really not getting the pleasurable feeling from starting a task. We all rely on dopamine from our brains to give us pleasure when we're doing a task we enjoy. And that's why it's easy to sit down and do tasks like play video games or scroll through TikTok. But students, and particularly students with ADHD who have lower levels of dopamine, they're not getting a dopamine rush or energy when they're sitting down to write that essay. And so it makes it a lot more challenging to actually get that metaphorical ball rolling. And then on top of those things, even if you have a student who doesn't have ADHD and those factors, some students do kind of have anxiety about the task or might genuinely be confused about the directions or just really have a lack of interest in the topic, which makes the task initiation hard given what the topic might be. So as you can see, there's a ton of different causes for a struggle with task initiation, kind of depending on your learner, but having a learning difference, ADHD, whether it's ADHD or dyslexia or a processing deficit, can certainly make task initiation much, much more challenging.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's really great description because it takes away the laziness and the lack of motivation explanation and really attributes some of these struggles to a learning difference or anxiety, or some other factors that are sometimes beyond or often beyond the student's control, and they need support in order to get started.
Yeah, I think what's really important there, Karen, is for them to understand themselves and what's truly coming in the way so that they can build the language and then learn. And we want to make the unconscious conscious, right? And so if they understand what's actually getting in the way of getting started and not calling themselves lazy, they'll begin to learn to manage themselves. And so bringing that awareness to them in a very gentle, exploratory way is the work that we do with them, right? And then showing the parents how to collaborate with them. So just in the example, like, for example, the one you were mentioning earlier of maybe the dinner table being served, the dinner being served, and they're just staring at it or they're looking at a blank screen, right? Lots of things could be coming in the way there. It could be anxiety. So it's like an amygdala hijack, right? Where their amygdala, their stress hormones are just firing off and it's debilitating. Truthfully, they can't get started. It's like a deer in the headlights, right? It could be they're not bought in, right? So that's a really important part of this. That's the difference. It has nothing to do with task initiation, but they may not be bought into doing it. So if someone told me, you need to run 3 miles at 6 p.m., I'm likely going to put that off and probably not do, right? Just because I know it's good for me doesn't mean I'm going to want to do it. So the buy-in has to be different. They need to see the value in it, what is in it for them, right? And that's also different from motivation. Motivation has a whole different sort of energy to it. That means, for example, the decorations for the holidays, right? I could be bought into bringing them down, but I wasn't really motivated to do that, right? So it's figuring out what is going to help them release some of that dopamine rush that Hannah was talking about earlier so that they can get fire up and activate themselves to get started. So once we can figure out what activates them, and what thoughts or, past experiences could be coming in the way, then we can begin to move forward, right?
Absolutely. And it's important because there are ripple effects when students struggle with task initiation. We talked about the fact that Students with ADHD often struggle with task initiation, and students with anxiety. And if you think about a child or an adolescent who's struggling with getting started on a task, which is what we're talking about, it takes them longer to actually complete that task because it took them so long to start it in the first place. And that student is looking at the time and it's 9:00 and I haven't even started and it's due tomorrow. That can create anxiety in a student who's not an anxious kid. And so you can have this snowball effect where you've got the task initiation that's maybe caused by ADHD and difficulties with that aspect of executive functioning. And that can actually create anxiety in that same kid because they want to get started. They may be motivated to get started, but they don't know where to start and how to start the task.
Yes. And that's why figuring out what works to activate them is so important, because this task initiation is a life skill. And so it's important for them to understand themselves and what gets them going so that they build an arsenal of tools that they can pull out whenever it's needed.
Yeah. And a lot of times students really, regardless of their age, do need support to get there. But when they can kind of unlock what helps them initiate tasks, it can really, really help at home, at school, in their interpersonal relationships. If students are able to better initiate tasks or learn some strategies or get some support with that, they're usually going to be less anxious and have less stress at home and school with those tasks we've been talking about. It also helps their relationships with peers. Students who are able to initiate tasks right away are able to collaborate better with their classmates, keep up in class, and be involved in kind of class discussions that they want to be a part of. And really, I think most importantly, when students feel like they are able to initiate tasks, even though they're hard, it really gives them a great sense of accomplishment, that they can reach their goals, that they can do what they need to get done without having that looming feeling like I really need to finish that super challenging task. So when students can receive support in this, it really helps in so many ways. And at the end of the day, task initiation is such an important skill, not just for students, but for adults as well. So as students develop the ability to start tasks, it really becomes a lifelong skill they can hopefully utilize as they kind of better understand themselves.
Right. And it's clearly important to support students who struggle with task initiation for all of the reasons you just stated. It's not only about academic success, it's about being able to navigate life as they transition into adulthood even. So I know that you both beautifully address task initiation and other executive functions in educational therapy as educational therapists, but how can parents further support their child's struggles in this area? What can parents do?
Okay, so there are many ways, right? But we'll try to keep them, and we've kind of clustered them into 3 different areas. And there are lots of different strategies, but we'll mention a few that we think might be very practical for parents to begin to use. One is they can modify the environment, right? So something that could be coming in the way of the task is a distraction. So maybe having the Xbox nearby, or, listening to a sibling watching a television show, right? Something that's competing with their decision making and also their attention. Right. So that could be, we want to modify distractions so that they are not tempted to begin something else. It could be noise. So what I do with students is we go through and we kind of create a profile of things that they like, right? And how to make that environment comfortable and conducive to their learning style. So I like to tell them we're going to design the environment. And that is really coming into what are your preferences? Do you like the windows open? Do you like the door open? Do you like a little bit of background noise? Do you want to work outside? Do you want to move around, right? So it's really coming into what do they like, and bring awareness to that. I can't tell you enough how many times students have organized their desk, and that alone makes a huge difference to help them get going, to get started on something. I find that really interesting. It could also be having a body double next to them, right? Just someone next to them that's also working. Doesn't have to be working with them, but just next to them. Mom could be in the kitchen cooking, or dad, and they're, at the dinner table doing their work or reading a book, and someone else is writing emails, right, et cetera. It's just having that physical presence next to them. And there are actually apps now that you can purchase and like book your time with your body double, other students who have the same struggles. Lots of adolescents do that. And also routines. Routines are very helpful. And I know, especially with like the students that, have these struggles, more likely than not, someone in the house also has these struggles. And so coming up with sticking to routines can be really difficult. But when students know what to expect and the structure of things, it removes some of that decision making and them being able to kind of wrestle with, should I get started now or should I put it off to later, right? So it helps them begin because they're in a flow. They already know what's coming. It's the structure of the day.
Yeah, and I'd say in addition to modifying those environments, like Jenny said, which I absolutely love, because that shows also how everyone might have a different environment they're going to be most successful in, and that really pays attention to the individual needs of each student. So in addition to that, I think families or parents can also modify the assignment or the task that the student is struggling with. And what that really means is adapting or scaffolding the task to make it more accessible for that child. And this could look like a lot of different things depending on the child's age. But a big way to modify an assignment is just to break it up into smaller, more manageable chunks. So let's say if a student has to do a book report, and that is a really big, scary task for them. So it might be helpful to come alongside the student and figure out what are all the different steps to completing this book report. First, we have to pick a book. Then we have to plan when we are going to read it, start reading it. Then we might have to actually draft the first paragraph, the second paragraph, the third paragraph of the report, and finally create the diorama, perhaps. So now we've taken this big project of a book report and broken it up into smaller chunks that seem easier to complete. This really does reduce anxiety and help the student start that first task. And when we do recommend, if you do help a student by breaking it up into chunks, just like creating a visual checklist of what those steps are, so students can track them and check them off the list. That really also, that kind of does give us that good feeling of a dopamine rush when we check things off our to-do list, and that can kind of keep the momentum going on the larger task. In addition to like just a simple way to kind of chunk or scaffold assignments when you see your student struggling is sometimes what I'll do as a therapist, a student might be really struggling with writing a paragraph, and they have all the directions on their Google Classroom, and then they're clicking back and forth from their document to their Google Classroom. It's really helpful for the student just to copy the directions onto their new Google Doc, title their Google Doc, and now they have their assignment. They've already started it. They have their assignment with their name and the directions right on it. And they don't have a blank page anymore. So they don't have that fear of, oh my gosh, I have nothing here. Now they have the prompt on there. And just starting that first step of the task can make the whole task seem a little less overwhelming. In addition to kind of looking at those smaller steps of an assignment, scheduling breaks while working can be really helpful for students. And this definitely differs on a case-by-case basis. Some students, when they take a break, they totally get off track and it's very challenging. Other students, if you set a clear routine for when to take breaks, how long those breaks should be, and what they should do on those breaks, having a little break to go grab a snack or to move their bodies can be a really helpful way to get through a long assignment. And I'd say finally, depending on your learner and their profile, there's some different accommodations that can be used to make it easier for the student to start working. So perhaps that could be using an audiobook to listen instead of reading, or typing or dictating the assignment instead of handwriting. So those are some accommodations that the school might recommend depending on if the student has a learning diagnosis, or you might just be able to utilize at home regardless. That can make the non-preferred task seem a little bit easier to start.
That's a really good one, especially for those students with dyslexia or specific learning disorder in reading, because they know that they struggle with reading. And so getting started on that difficult task is often the challenge.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think a big part, like overall, I think in modifying the assignment, it's making it easy enough for them to feel like they can get started. And also with the instructions and the small steps, like Hannah was saying, that's developing that internal dialogue, right? To help them get from A to B. So I'll add that sometimes we'll see teachers will post paragraph length instructions. And for someone who has trouble with visual processing or reading or comprehension or working memory, those instructions are lost. And that alone is very overwhelming. So, just something else, collaborating with the student on highlighting the key words and then bullet pointing them with specific verbs in front. So it's not just, it's got to be concrete, really small step, and each verb needs to be listed so that they know, okay, this is what I'm going to do. It's not math problems 7 through 8. It's solve math problem, right? We want a verb in front of the step itself. The last one that we wanted to touch on is modifying your expectations. So as students who are diagnosed with ADHD, their research shows that executive function skills tend to be 30% underdeveloped or lagging behind a neurotypical, quote unquote, brain, right? So if we see a student who's 12 years old and they're really having a hard time with getting started on their homework, well, modifying our expectations, we can ask ourselves, what would we expect, right? Like their chronological age is 12 years old. Their neurological age, though, might be closer to 8 or 9. And so would we really expect a child to get home after school and get started on homework immediately at that age, right? And so that puts it into context for us to understand where they're coming from a little bit, where they are developmentally, as well as allowing for natural consequences to happen, right? So rather than us imposing the consequence on them, talking through what could happen. All right, you want to watch, this football game that's on tonight, that's on at 5 p.m. today. Before you do that, would it be okay asking for permission, right? Would it be okay if you begin your homework so that you can do this? You can enjoy that time. If the homework isn't begun by then that means no football, right? That's a natural consequence that's been decided on mutually, parent and child, right? Could be adolescent, teen, etc. But it's got to be done before the consequence is set. Otherwise, it's considered a punishment. And that's not helpful. It's not beneficial to neither party if it's a punishment. Also, scaffold, right? Know your child. What type of support do they need, and provide just the right amount of support. So not too much, not too little, but scaffold them. So they might need more help in some subjects than in others. And it's really providing the appropriate amount of support so that they feel competent in getting started with something. And then the last one is allowing them to make mistakes and for things not to be perfect, right? Because sometimes that alone, they put a ton of pressure on themselves to perform or for the outcome of things. And what we're really focusing on here is the process. It's the progress that they're making towards something. So it's not, if we put so much pressure on making things perfect or them doing it our way, then that alone is, they feel like we're not on their team, right? And that their efforts aren't being noticed and seen. And so it's highlighting, giving them the specific praise that really highlights their process. Like, what are they doing? What are they doing well?
And also acknowledge, say it's okay for a parent to acknowledge the struggle and say, I understand that this project is really hard and it's not your favorite thing to do. You would rather be outside riding your bike. Yeah, it's going to be hard, but what can we do about that? So I think we can't really trick students into thinking that they want to necessarily do this really preferred task. So it's okay to be honest and say, I actually struggle with doing this other task. I see that this is going to be hard. But let's work through it together. I know you can do it. So kind of acknowledging that struggle helps the student feel seen, and there's not anything wrong with them. Their struggle and their challenges really are normal.
Absolutely. And I think that really validates the student's experience that they're having, that this is hard. And oftentimes that is a relief, and that alone can decrease some of the anxiety. And to your point about things not having to be perfect, that can have the same outcome in decreasing anxiety. And it also normalizes the experience of making mistakes, because we all make mistakes. And that's part of the learning process. We learn from our mistakes, and then we pivot and we do things differently. We test a different hypotheses. We try a different approach or a different strategy. That's all part of the learning process. So that is helpful not only with task initiation, it's helpful in so many other aspects of daily living and academic skills.
Yeah, I'm really glad you touched on that, because I thought of something else, like a very quick practical thing parents can do all the time is to model our thinking, right? So we do this naturally with ourselves, but we don't always say it explicitly. And our littles, they're learning these skills, right? And what they hear, I think this is the most practical way to teach them, because it's not coming as a lecture. They're seeing you as a human being, that you also struggle with the same issues they do. And they listen to you and can pick it up organically without feeling judged or triggered by it. So saying out loud, and you can even fake it. I really don't want to write this email right now. You know what? I'm going to get some coffee to help me get going on it, right? So they begin to see how you use tools as well to get going on things.
Absolutely. And I love that you gave that example and of modeling, because that's another way that students learn, is from watching other people. And like you said, a lot of the things that we do, we internalize the instructions, the sequence, and they just see the final product. They just see that this beautiful meal was put on the table. But there are a lot of steps that went into creating that meal for them. And sometimes if we verbalize that out loud, well, I've got to make dinner. Okay, let me get started on this. The first thing I'm going to do is, pull out my recipe book, or get the meat out of the fridge. Those kinds of steps help them to see the process from beginning to end, from task initiation and then the sequencing of it. And then they start to internalize the process of a task.
Exactly. Yeah. And it shows them we're human. We struggle with the same things, and we're relatable.
Yep. Oh, forgot to put the salt in again. Yep. Right. And so you both really described some great strategies that parents can utilize to support their kids. You also have a great downloadable PDF that I'm going to put a link to in the show notes. And they're strategies for students, explicit strategies for students to use. Do you have time to quickly go over some of those? And I'm definitely going to put them in the show notes so that parents can have something to use as a guide.
Of course. Thank you so much. So I will say, especially as educational therapists, it's always our goal to help students eventually be able to do a task independently and successfully. So we want to, of course, scaffold and modify their experience with assignments, but also provide tools and strategies that a student could use on their own to initiate tasks. So along with all the things we mentioned that parents can do and parents can modify at home when these struggles arise, we also think it can be helpful to explicitly teach a few task initiation strategies to students that they can test out on their own. And I will say, depending on the age of your child, some strategies might work better than others, but it can be kind of helpful for you to give a student kind of a toolbox of things they could try out when they get in a scenario where they feel like procrastinating and don't want to start a task. So we do have a downloadable for you, and we have 5 strategies that we're going to share and that we think are really great for students of all ages. And they have a nice little acronym of START to help students remember them.
I love acronyms.
So the first one is, the S is for self-check. And so we love to have a student actually do a full body scan and say, am I ready to begin? Do I have the supplies I need? Am I in a comfortable environment? Have I gone to the bathroom? Do I understand the directions? So just asking themselves those simple questions can help them modify their own environment so they're ready to go. So we really like S for self-check. And I will say that all of these strategies you would need to model and teach your students, kind of show them how to do it if you want them to utilize them eventually on their own. And then the next one we like is T for time yourself. We always love incorporating a timer in our work. So we love to have students get out a small visual timer. This can be like a separate timer. It could be on a phone or a computer. And we like to just say, set the timer for 5 minutes and just see if you can work for 5 minutes. That sounds a lot less overwhelming than, working for 3 hours. And we often find once they have worked for 5 minutes, they got the energy going to push that ball. It's rolling down the hill. The momentum's coming. So they oftentimes will continue after the 5 minutes. So just time yourself for 5 minutes is our next strategy. And then the third one is A for activate your body, which means just start moving, take some action. So a lot of times when similar to that dinner analogy you shared, we see a student just sitting there motionless, not sure where to begin. If they actually just take a simple action of picking up the pencil, picking up the fork if it's at dinner time, opening their textbook to the right page, that action can be enough to kind of get their body and their brain moving towards the direction they want to go. I actually use this strategy all the time when I'm trying to motivate myself to go work out. My action is, okay, I'm going to put on my shoes and I'm just going to go outside and start running. And oftentimes that's actually the hardest part of my workout is just taking that initial action. But once that's done, the task is much easier to complete. Now let Jenny talk about the other two.
The R is for reward yourself. So again, students who are time blind, right? They don't see the end in sight. And so it's really coming up with how are you going to process what you've done and also celebrate that for yourself. So it could be, I'm going to go watch the football game, or I'm going to play with my dog and then come back to this. So just something little to look forward to begin to release a little more of that dopamine again. And then the last one is T for start, tough or easy. So this one is, do you want to start with something that's hard or something that's easier, right? And this is going to vary depending on energy, mood, sleep that day, etc. So it's some students would want to start with something easy just to activate and get going with something. Others want to start with something hard to get the hardest, most mentally exhausting thing out of the way. And so coming, for them to think through and, make a brain list, a brain dump of all the things that they need to do and then circle which one would be best to start with today is helpful for them to get started and initiate.
I love that. And it's very easy for students to follow, and even better when you have the support of an educational therapist kind of guiding you through these steps. And I know that you both have provided such great information today about task initiation and how it connects to so many other things that can get in the way of students completing tasks. If parents or even providers, teachers want to learn more about the work that you do as educational therapists and how that can help kids who struggle with task initiation and other aspects of executive functioning, what is the best way for listeners to get in touch with you?
For me, this is Hannah here. You can reach me at my website, summitlearning.la, or you can email me at hannahross.edtherapy@gmail.com. And in my practice is Summit Learning, and we do work with lots of students with ADHD as well as students in need of dyslexia support and reading remediation. So definitely love to talk to parents and providers and just spread the word about supporting students.
Wonderful. And Jenny?
And I am at wethrive.learning.com, or you can email me at jenny@wethrive.learning.com. And I support students. We specialize in supporting students who have ADHD. We coach parents as well, offer them support in raising our complex kids, as well as dyscalculia and students who struggle with written expression. So yes, I hope to hear from everyone.
Wonderful. Well, I can't thank you both enough for being here. Again, this is such great information, really helpful information with tips for parents and students. Thank you so much. I appreciate you both and all the work that you're doing to support our neurodiverse kiddos.
Thank you for having us, Karen.
Thank you.
Make sure to grab the downloadable PDF in the show notes, Strategies for Task Initiation. And to learn more about how educational therapy can help your child or your student who struggles with task initiation or other aspects of executive functioning, reach out to our guests. Their contact information is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.